Hello, and welcome to Forget What You Learned, a place for families to stop and reflect on the modern state of education. We empower you to challenge your own thinking about today's traditional school system and ask the question, are my kids thriving? I'm Cory Greenberg, a parent in the trenches just like you, and I chat with innovators, experts, and other parents who are changing the conversation, inspiring families to reevaluate how we define academic success. This podcast is brought to you by Pacific Preparatory and Tutor Corps, sister organizations molding education through innovative one-on-one learning for students in today's digital world. In today's episode, I talk with Jamai Blivin, who spent her recent career in this dilemma. Most people need a high-paying job to afford college, but need college to afford a higher-paying job. She is a tireless advocate for the systemic change that would begin to resolve this mismatch. Jamai believes we need to emphasize the importance of actual skills over that piece of paper, and she has ideas about how to make it happen. One of them is pretty simple. Our teenagers should be prioritizing getting a job. How many parents like the sound of that? Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I know the focus of our show is on our K-12 system. What's broken, what's not, what schools and models are out there that are innovative and forward-thinking, what issues are facing our kids related to education and the parenting dilemmas within. Today, though, we're really zooming out past K-12 to talk about a much bigger picture of what our workforce should look like. I mean, after all, school is supposed to prepare us to contribute meaningfully to society and to allow us to make a living wage. My guest today is an expert on what our workforce needs, and what we currently do in education is a profound mismatch. I'm so glad to introduce Jamai Blivin, founder and CEO of Innovate and Educate, a nonprofit focused on big system change to create new employment pathways and an emphasis on skills over degree attainment. From an initial career in corporate America to years in the classroom teaching underserved youth, Jamai realized there were gaping holes between supply and demand in both education and the workforce. She's the author of Status, Reversing Degrees of Discrimination, where she lays out the issue in detail. The majority of Americans that are of working age do not have a college degree, but a status symbol for success is that four-year degree. Herein lies the chicken and egg dilemma, and it boils down to this. The degree before work paradigm will need to shift to a work and learn economy because most need a high-paying job to afford college, but need college to get a high-paying job. Phew! Welcome to the show, Jamai.
Thank you, Cory. I'm just thrilled to be here.
So let's start with the basics. I think you said in your book that only 1/3 of adults in the US have a college degree. So the most desirable, highest paying jobs are going to that minority. Why is this a problem for all of us?
Well, if you dive into that 1/3, it really does become a poverty and minority issue because 60 to 80%, I'll just kind of use that, of Latinos, African Americans, and Native Americans, as well as rural Americans, don't have a degree. So it's a huge number overall that is being left out of the economy. There's been big leaps towards skills, but there's one last big leg, and that's the employer piece.
Yes, and there's so many levels to what you are not only dissecting, but then also proposing as a shift. So, can you just kind of go back to the basics for our audience who hasn't yet read your book or understand your perspective? What do you mean by needing to shift from a degree before work to a work and learn economy?
So we started this work when the Kellogg Foundation funded us for disconnected youth back in 2009. So we've been working on this for a long time. And it was just, the fact and the statistics about the degree being the only way you get a good paying job, right?
Mhm.
And so what the book lays out is that most people in our country, at least two-thirds, if not more, have to work while they learn. They have to work at least 20 hours a week, if not 40, to go to school and provide for their family, provide for themselves, and that comes around with poverty and low income, which is we'll talk about that later. Um, so what really has happened is that we still have a education environment, even high school, that requires full-time seat time. And it's hard to work when you have full-time seat time. So what we see is as early as ninth grade, we start seeing high school dropout, ninth grade, 10th grade. We lose a lot before 11th grade, and it's because they have to go to work for their families, for themselves. I work with a lot of students that provide income at age 16 to pay the electric bill. I recently had a student that had no electricity in
Yeah.
10th grade.
Yes, and that is the vast majority of Americans are dealing with this. And,
Mhm.
sometimes I think in our bubble, perhaps of the listeners of this podcast are not as aware of that as an issue, but it does really affect all of us. So can you talk about the ways in which that dynamic actually affects the adult workforce in general in our economy?
Well, I think what happens is people have to choose work over learning because that's the only choice they have financially, but it also impacts their confidence because education does provide confidence to people no matter what. So what we've seen over the last decade is tons of employers, Starbucks, McDonald's, Walmart. Now those are, lower paying jobs. Um, but we've seen lots of employers that have entry-level jobs providing free education, education while they work, education that does not cost them while they're working at Taco Bell somewhere, so that they are providing this work and learn environment. And I've continued to believe that corporate America will be the largest learning provider way over higher education in the next 25 years because higher education just can't the funding formula doesn't meet the needs of what the learner needs, right? So it's very difficult to provide what that learner needs because they have to choose work over learning.
And so what's in it for the Starbucks of the world? Why are they why are they providing? Why are they going to become, the biggest provider of this
You
education?
know, I they believe it's retention, but
Mhm.
they also Amazon says I mean, part of it is their social, I talk about this in the book. There's a lot of marketing dollars that provide for this because it's a social good and it markets the company really, really well. So they're doing it out of their CSR, their customer service relation dollars, not HR dollars. So it's kind of feel good for the company. But Amazon does say, we don't care if they go up or out. So it's really providing an overall economic opportunity for the learner, but also hopefully they have brand loyalty, which that's a whole different discussion. And they decide to stay with the company because that company provided for their education. My company paid for my master's in business many, many years ago, or I
Yep.
wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yep.
So same thing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And let's go back to the high school piece. So you touched on it just a little bit. Because that's something you and I talked about when we talked before this is what do you see as some of the issues within the K-12 system, specifically in high school, that could be different? Because I want to unpack the skills piece that you talk about because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah,
And I had never heard it talked about before. So what could we do
really.
differently in high school? Yeah.
Like, what I don't really understand is why so many high schools are not shifting to and skills plus a 2 year associate's degree. I mean, I started
Mm.
working on that back in early 2000s in North Carolina when I was with the North Carolina Tech Association, and the Gates Foundation was funding early college high schools, to where a student leaves with a 2-year diploma, 2-year higher education diploma. Same thing with the IBM P-Tech model. IBM invested tons of money into creating these early college high schools that get you a 2-year degree and they place you with an employer, right? I really can't say why there's not more of that because to me, most cities are probably 90% your traditional go to college model, or that's what they're trained to do. And maybe there's these wonderful, diamonds in the rough that are doing the other work. Um, and so to me, what has to happen is more colleges and more, excuse me, K-12, specifically high schools, that teach skills and degrees and provide credentials that allow someone to go on into work and then continue with their degree.
Yes, actually, I live here in Houston and we have a couple of those early college high schools. And they do, I mean, it's a win-win for so many reasons. Number, I
Yeah, I
mean,
looked at Graduate, which I didn't know of until you told me about it. How large is that school? I didn't look at the size.
which one are we talking about?
Graduate in Houston.
I, that's a good question. I'm not sure how big it is.
That's a great model, and they're partnered with Southern New Hampshire University on their competency-based degree model. So, I think the big problem though, Cory, is that parents don't know about it, right?
Right.
I mean, parents don't know how to navigate the system, especially parents in poverty. I started working in this space when my kids were still in elementary, so I figured it out, right? I knew how to maneuver it. But most parents don't, and they don't have the time, and they trust that their city, their county, their community is taking care of their children. And the truth of it is they get lost. They get lost in the system, and we lose so many, many young people. They may graduate, but that doesn't mean that they're graduating with skills or even mathematics or reading. I just met with a county who we have a contract with that is we were looking at dropping the high school diploma as a requirement for some of these jobs. And there was a lot of discussion that do we want to drop the high school diploma or do we want them to try to go to an online high school where they get the diploma, not just a GED, but a diploma while they're working for the county to build their confidence? So you hire them and say, you'll get a raise once you finish your high school diploma. And I like that because nobody wants to say they didn't finish high school because it's a stigma. Then it's a stigma to say you didn't go to college, which I'm very opposed to. I'm very
Yeah.
opposed to that stigma, as you know.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and that's the other piece of your work that I think we should unpack a little bit is the competency-based hiring piece. So you're trying to convince all of these not just companies but governments
Mhm.
who employ tons and tons of people to look at individuals in terms of their employability for their skills, not the degree. So and
Right.
that's a huge undertaking because number one, you have to be able to assess
Right.
these applicants for their skills. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I know you read my book, so that's helpful because I talk about that. Um, there are ways to assess these skills. I haven't figured out why employers don't use them more. I I mean, there's a little bit of worry about liability because they don't want to be sued for using assessment and then being sued for not hiring, right? All Most companies use assessments to hire, but they don't rely on those assessments like they do an education degree. So, when the federal government under both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, no, President Obama, then Donald Trump, then Joe Biden got the Office of Personnel at our federal government level to say you cannot require a college degree on any of our jobs. But then when I tried to get with OPM and I tried to get with the federal government to understand how they were doing it, I never could get any answers because they still don't know how to assess for competencies. And there are ways you can assess for competencies, specifically cognitive competencies. They are validated. That would be reading for information, business business math or math for workplace, not geometry, not algebra, for business for the workplace. And there's tons of technical competencies that Southern New Hampshire, other universities have, especially community college, that assess for those technical competencies, whether it's a manufacturing technician or a clean energy technician. So what we're seeing is a shift to more competency-based assessments. The problem is the employers are that final leg to recognize those. And we are not seeing a lot of that yet. They say, yay, that's great that you got it. But they aren't saying, oh, they got that, we will hire them.
Okay, I see. And because when you start to talk about the skills, I'm picturing soft skills and
Yeah,
maybe employers
that
saying,
too.
it's so subjective. How do we kind of evaluate people for that? But what you're describing is no, there's actual data. I mean, you can, especially if the position is something technical in nature, that seems like it would be more useful to employer than just whether they got a degree and you have no idea if they, actually went to class or if they copied notes from a friend. I mean, this
Right.
is,
That's right. And on those soft skills, those are measurable too. What employers are using is personality assessments, and those are not valid.
okay.
Personality changes, and I talk about that some. But soft skills, which include customer service, communication, critical thinking, those are measurable. And there are assessments for those. The other thing that we found in our research with the Kellogg Foundation is if someone has to take assessments to get a job, sometimes they just don't show up to take the assessment. Well, that's a perfect assessment on will they show up? Will they
Yep.
show up on time? If somebody won't take an assessment to get a job, they aren't serious, especially if they can do it online. If it was a 10-hour, well, no, there's really no excuse to not take an assessment if you want a job, unless it's fear, which fear is big, and
Yeah.
and the employer would need to explain these assessments. But soft skills can be measured as well as those hard skills. Personality should not come into factor because it is not, it does change depending on the situation of that person at that moment and their stress level.
So, and what you're saying is that these assessments can be used for jobs from all the way from an entry level up through, a very high level position in many, many fields.
It really can.
And okay. And so, but you're saying that the three presidents that you mentioned, that bill was passed so that
Yes,
the federal, okay, so federal jobs cannot require a
a
college
college
degree.
degree. Nope,
And
they cannot.
they are using these assessments
No.
or
That,
okay.
they,
Oh, that's the piece you couldn't figure
I
out.
couldn't get any
Okay.
answers. I called him. I emailed the Office of Personnel Management at the federal level, got a very high end response. We will get back with you.
Mm,
And I never, I emailed multiple times. So there is no set way. And I'm not saying that there should be one assessment. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it, the ACT and the SAT became the two assessments in our country. Um, for high school competency or college ready. I don't know what assessments should be used, but there are many validated assessments on the market, and most of the employers only use like reading or math if they
mm,
use them at all, if they use them. And then what happens to the one that didn't do well? They have nowhere to go. So if you didn't do well on math, they don't ever know why they didn't get the job.
yeah, there
Right?
needs
They
to
got
be some
screened out.
feedback.
right?
Hmm.
So we created a whole loop system when we did this pilot, but it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work. But in cities, this could be done. And I think cities and counties have great opportunities to do that, working with their school district. But there's a lot of money in education, and it's really hard to break down that old system.
Yes. Well, and that's something we've talked about a lot here in this podcast is just these kinds of
Mhm.
systems, even though it's actually a relatively short amount of time across
Like,
history that you
right,
think of our current system, it still
right,
is quite entrenched. And like you said, there's a lot of stakeholders with purse strings in terms of changing it. But the other piece is, you're advocating for these assessments being a piece of hiring, but then before that, you're also advocating for programs to teach these skills, correct? Like
right.
in terms of competency
That's right.
based degrees. So can you talk about that a little bit? What does that look like?
Well, like in high school, there is a multitude of if high school students, and South Carolina worked on this. In South Carolina, we did a report on employability skills for high schoolers, and it's on our website. It was really a great study because South Carolina really focused on soft skills. The students would graduate high school with soft skills, and they had curriculum teaching those soft skills. Accenture has a huge multi faceted curriculum that is free. They partnered with Goodwill to provide this soft skills curriculum. So that's out there, and people could graduate high school with something that says, just like the SAT, ACT, right? It would
Hmm.
be a trusted credential that I have those skills. The problem is there's no time to teach those in a traditional school system, right? They have to teach to the Common Core. They have to teach. I think that's when the schools that we're working with in New Mexico specifically are non-traditional. They have more periods that allow that flexibility to teach those skills. So we teach pro skills, which is a whole soft skill leadership teamwork curriculum in those high schools. In Colorado, we are building the pathways throughout the entire state based on competencies. So, our lead consultant in Colorado is building every high demand industry, the competencies employers are looking for, and how to measure those. Now, the final step is get employers to use it. Right,
Right.
we're working with the educators and the workforce leaders to do that. um, when that work gets done, we've been doing it for about 6 years now. When that work is done, it'll be more of an employer push to explain to the employers this is how we want you to hire in Colorado. And Colorado is very advanced in this work, they've been doing it a long time.
That's wonderful. And so those are public schools that you're working with, both in New Mexico and Colorado.
Yep.
Non-traditional, but
Well, in
publicly funded.
Colorado, it's they're working more with the community. We're working more with the community college system and higher ed. But that can go back into My Colorado Journey, which is a platform that is in Colorado to explore career paths starting as early as ninth grade. It may even be seventh grade, but it's called My Colorado Journey.
Okay.
South Carolina is doing something similar. So it's really exciting work. It's just that, I mean, compared to 17 years ago when we started this, we were at the 3 yard line. Or let's say, I use yard line, but baseball's my game. So we were between home plate and first. Now we're between third and home plate,
Oh, that's
right?
big progress. I
I
love that.
know, but
Yeah.
that's when you get taken out the most, right? That's when
Yes,
you're
that's right.
sliding
There's the
into
stakes
home.
are bigger. The stakes are
Yeah.
so big. But yeah.
So it's my passion is really getting those employers to hire. And I tell you, we have 98% of our kids get hired after pro skills, but it's because we know those employers. So it still is that connection piece
Yeah.
versus, all the kids that I started working with this last semester, they said, well, I applied to the county 13 times, I've never heard back. Well, now we're placing people into the county because they know all we do is say they applied. Would you please look at their resume? Right? That's
Yeah.
still very personal. And I don't know how you change that. New York passed a big bill, New York City, almost 4 years ago, that said you cannot use technology that does the sorting of the resumes based on degrees and other requirements, which is pretty much artificial intelligence. And that got somebody argued against it, so that's never happened. So now that AI is out there, it's even bigger that it's just going through resumes like crazy to find those keywords.
Oh my gosh. And actually, I mean, that's not something we've talked about here, but there are such big questions about
You know?
the just AI and it, is the system inherently racist? Is it inherently just,
It's
not
just
taking into account? Yes, yes, there's some injustice issues
oh,
that
it is
possibly could
just
come up.
so big.
Yeah.
Yes, it is just incredible. And I, I don't know what the answers are. I just listened to an interview yesterday by my friend Dr. Perminder Jessel, and they were interviewing her about AI and the working learner and what jobs were at the most risk. She had,
So,
some unique opinions. I'm not sure anybody knows what jobs are at the most risk because nobody really, I mean, obviously, editorial is probably at a big risk,
mhm.
right?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
But it is just such an unknown.
Yeah. Well, another thing that I think really, our audience of parents would really appreciate your perspective on is one thing you talk about is that all high school students should work, even if they don't have to, right? They should get
Yes.
a job. And I feel like, as a parent of school age kids, I don't hear as much as when I was a kid of teenagers having jobs. They are so overscheduled and they have the demands and the pressures of I've got to get into a college, so I have to go abroad and do this like really rigorous summer program and all of this stuff, and
Mhm.
nobody works at an ice cream store anymore. And so can you talk about that a little bit? What experience does that provide high schoolers that they really need moving forward?
Well, and not just high school, but college, right? I mean, we made our kids get a job in a high school, and we made them get a job in college, um, because it provides these skills. And what I tell the kids that we work with, connections. I still am in touch with people that I worked for at age 18. I stayed in touch with them. It was in a bank. And I think that it's incredibly important for the resume, more than going abroad in a way. And it provides these skills that just you can't get anywhere else. And I don't know if anybody's written a book about that, but it is just so important. It really does provide those skills of working in teams, showing up on time, getting those customer service skills, understanding that you don't want to work in an ice cream shop forever, most likely,
Yeah, and how
right?
about managing money too? I mean,
Managing money for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, when you see that you're let's just take the ice cream shop, you're making minimum wage, I think that's really important for kids to understand that like there's a lot of really hard work that goes into that 8-hour shift that you just pulled, and what you're pulling out of it. I mean, it's just teaching like how the
Right.
value of money,
The
right?
value of money. And, when I sit down and we do cash flow in our final sessions, I say, okay, most of the kids I work with will not be going on to college because they just don't, they aren't, um, for multiple reasons, mostly because they can't. They have to go to work. And I
Yep.
say, okay, what are you going to make? And they say $18 an hour, which sounds pretty good for a high school kid. And then I said, okay, there's 2,080 hours in a year of work. About 2,080. So let's multiply that. Then I say, how much is your cell phone? How much is your rent? How much is your car payment? And then all of a sudden, they're freaking out because I tell them, okay, you're going to get taxes held, and then this is what your take home is. And, write down how you're going to live on that, and it's scary. And I think if you work in a high school like our kids did, it really, really, really creates. And I started working so early because I had to, and what skills I learned, just incredible. And the people skills, oh my gosh, my job at Burger King, I had the worst boss in the century. I'm sure of it. I
Yeah,
don't
and that's
remember his
something.
name, but it was so bad.
Yeah, I've had my share of those as well, and it does kind of teach. I mean, yes, it teaches you so many things, and I feel really strongly about that. My oldest wants to work. He's going into ninth grade. He's already deciding,
Okay,
like, where, and I
perfect.
don't care how that impacts his college application. I think that it is so critical for
I
all
think
the reasons we talked
employers
about.
want it now more than ever. They don't want to see a kid that did 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, and never worked. I mean, maybe, you've got your few Harvard, Princeton, some of the Stanford. Yeah, 4 years of that, and you graduate with a 4 point, we'll take you, right? But I think most of them are really looking at work experience.
And
I
those
think it's,
kids might flounder, to be honest, because if they've never
yeah,
had to, again, clock in for, I mean, those jobs might be 12-hour days. It's not setting them up for success in life,
that's
I
right.
don't think. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I do think, I mean, the high schools have such an opportunity to create a new model. I know Nashville, Tennessee did that. They created every high school in Nashville, Davidson County became a career high school, and they worked with the Ford Institute, Ford Foundation to do that. It can be done. It just takes leadership and the willingness to change and the boldness of the leadership team superintendent on down to have a long vision. But it can be done 100%. And I don't think it pegs someone if you choose the tech high school over the health high school. That doesn't mean that you're stuck in that, right? It just gives you another credential for your pocket that you may want to do one day. As we know, I think it's the person graduating high school now. I think it's like they'll change jobs 20 times in their lifetime, and we've seen that with our own kids. Other
Yeah.
than the traditional engineer, um, I think engineering and medical are still two pathways that are very traditional, and rightly so. You need someone that can build a bridge that's not going to kill a lot of people, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's more of a
Yeah,
prescriptive path is what you're
that's right.
saying. Yeah.
That's right.
That makes sense. Oh my goodness. Well, this has been absolutely lovely. I have been so excited to talk to you because, again, this is just kind of a unique perspective to what we talk about on this podcast, which is our K-12 system and then
Yeah,
lots of higher education. But it fits in
so good.
perfectly with just opening people's eyes a little bit to what is happening on a systemic level that could really shift. So it's been lovely having you. I do want to
Well,
know.
if anybody wants information on different options, I know almost all 50 states and different people doing this kind of work. So if anyone wants to reach me, they can reach me through our website, and I will be happy to refer them to learn more about unique ways to work and learn at the same time.
Amazing. So, okay, we're going to put your website in the show notes, but tell everybody where they, what's, what, where can they find you?
It's innovate-educate.org. That's our website.
Innovateeducate.org. Great.
Mhm.
Okay. And lastly, Jamai, what book do you think that our listeners should read?
Well, I don't know if they should read it. I thought, what I just have finished is I try to understand this space that we're in. And I just finished a book called Poverty by America. Um, by Matthew Desmond, and I bought it because I read about it because I'm flabbergasted to realize that the US, while the richest country on earth, has more poverty than any other advanced democracy. And the book really draws on history and research and trying to understand what keeps poor people poor. And so much of it is education and lack of opportunities to connect to communities that they can engage with and move up. So it's really a fierce argument on what has to change in America to pull people out of poverty. I'm not sure that that's a light read, but it's something that I think the United States is just it's really scary to think how much of a divide we has, and morally it just is wrong. It's just tough to understand. And education is and always will be a way out.
A way out. Yeah.
And
Well, and
skills, education, skills, and jobs. I mean, we're actually working with previous incarcerated on a project, and the only thing that will keep them out of recidivism, the only thing will be work. If they can't work, they will go back to prison.
yeah.
And that's kind of everything. We all have to work, and we all have to have the opportunity to work. And skills are critical in that pathway.
Yeah, so it sounds like even though not a light read, hopefully encouraging to you in terms of the what you're working on truly is
Mhm.
the antidote or at least a big part of the answer to
Right,
solving the social issues. Yeah.
right,
Okay. I love that.
right.
Well, thanks again for coming on
Boy,
the show,
thank
Jamai.
you. Thank you for the work you guys are doing, and, it takes a village, for
It takes a
sure.
village.
And it's a
Absolutely.
wonderful village of good people doing really good work, so thank you for that. And I hope your son gets a great job this summer. You
Thank you. I
know,
hope so too.
2 of my kids weren't 15 yet, or 16, whatever, so we had to get the waiver, which is easy to do. You can get a
Yep.
waiver to work before working age, and we did that.
All right. Well, I'll have to keep you posted on that.
Yes, do. Thank
All
you
right,
so much,
everyone. Take care.
Cory. Bye. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Forget What You Learned, hosted by me, Cory Greenberg. As always, our goal is to allow you to zoom out on the snapshot of your family's life and answer the question, are my kids thriving? We're here to inspire you to make those small and maybe big changes to answer yes. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Pacific Preparatory and Tutor Corps, sister organizations committed to educating students with an innovative and holistic approach in today's digital world. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and review. See you next time.